I thought breaking a glass would cost me my job, not my life. The sound came first, sharp and final, like something small snapping in half, and then silence, heavy and unnatural, spreading across the ballroom as if someone had turned the world off with a switch. I stood there with my hands still frozen in the air, shards glittering at my feet, a thin line of red tracing down my wrist, and for a second I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even blink, because every eye in that room had turned toward me, not with concern, not with kindness, but with that familiar look I'd learned to ignore, the one that said I didn't belong here, that I was just part of the background until I made a mistake. My name is Emily Carter, 24, working double shifts just to keep the lights on in a one-bedroom apartment I barely slept in. And nights like this were supposed to be simple. Carry the tray, smile when spoken to, disappear when not, survive. That was always the goal, just survive. But the moment that glass hit the marble floor, everything changed. I felt it before I understood it. Like the air itself had shifted, colder somehow, tighter, and then I saw him, standing across the room like he'd been there the whole time. Like he owned not just the space but the silence inside it. Tall, composed, dressed in a way that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. People moved without being told when he stepped forward. Conversations didn't resume. They faded. Like they knew better, like everyone knew better, except me, because I was still standing there trying to remember how to breathe. His eyes found mine, not curious, not annoyed, just certain, and something in my chest tightened in a way I didn't understand. Not fear exactly, something deeper, like instinct screaming too late. And then he raised his hand. One simple motion, controlled, precise, and pointed directly at me. You, he said, his voice low but carrying across the entire room without effort. Come with me. My heart dropped so fast it made me dizzy. I shook my head before I even realized I was doing it. I'm sorry, I'll clean it up. I didn't mean to. The words rushed out, small, useless, but he didn't look at the broken glass, didn't even glance at the mess at my feet. He was still looking at me, like none of that mattered, like I was the only thing in the room worth noticing. And that was worse, so much worse, because men like him didn't notice people like me unless there was a reason. Please, I tried again, quieter this time. I have another shift tomorrow. I can't. He stepped closer, and everything inside me went still, not because he touched me, he didn't, but because he didn't need to. His presence was enough, the kind that made space shrink, made options disappear. You were in the wrong place, he said, calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something final, at the worst possible time. I swallowed hard, my fingers curling slightly as I took a step back. I didn't see anything. I whispered, even though I hadn't been asked, even though I wasn't sure what I was denying. But something told me it mattered. Something told me it was already too late. His gaze didn't change, didn't soften, didn't harden, just stayed fixed on me like he was measuring something I couldn't see. And then he leaned in just enough for only me to hear. That's not the problem. My breath caught, my pulse loud in my ears. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about a broken glass, wasn't about a mistake. This was something else entirely, something bigger, something dangerous in a way I couldn't name. And when he straightened, when he turned slightly toward the exit as if the decision had already been made, I knew, with a certainty that made my chest ache, that if I walked away right now, I wouldn't be walking back into the life I had 5 minutes ago. I'd be walking straight into something I didn't survive. The doors opened before I could change my mind, before I could pretend this was still something small, something I could walk away from. And the night air hit my skin like a wake-up call I was not ready for. Cool, sharp, real. I hesitated on the marble steps, my fingers still trembling, my mind racing through every possible explanation that would make this normal. But nothing fit. Nothing made sense. Behind me the ballroom glowed like a different world, warm and distant, already closing itself off from me, and in front of me, black cars waited in a perfect line, engines running, headlights cutting through the dark like quiet warnings. He did not rush me. That was the worst part. He did not grab my arm, did not force me forward. He just stood there, watching, like he already knew what I would do, like the choice had never really been mine. I cannot go with you, I said, my voice barely steady, barely mine. I have a job. I have responsibilities. I cannot just disappear. The words sounded small the moment they left my mouth, fragile against the silence around us. He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way someone studies a problem they have already solved. You think this is about your job, he said quietly, and there was no mockery in his tone, just certainty. Emily, look at me. My name. The way he said it, calm, precise, like it belonged to him already, sent a chill down my spine. I should have asked how he knew it, should have demanded answers, but instead I looked, and the moment I did, I understood something I had been trying not to see. This was not a misunderstanding, not an overreaction. This was deliberate. I did not hear anything. I insisted, stronger this time, because if I kept saying it, maybe it would become true. Maybe it would be enough. His gaze did not waver. It is not what you heard, he replied, stepping closer, just enough to make the space between us feel smaller. It is who saw you hear it. My breath caught, confusion slipping into something colder, something sharper. I do not understand, I whispered, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softness, not kindness, but something that almost resembled patience. You do not have to, he said. You just have to decide if you want to stay alive long enough to understand later. The words landed heavier than they should have. Simple, quiet, but impossible to ignore. I shook my head, taking another step back, my heel catching slightly on the edge of the step. You are trying to scare me, I said. But even I could hear the doubt in my voice. He exhaled slowly, like he had expected this, like resistance was part of the process. If I wanted to scare you, he said, his voice lowering just enough to pull me closer instead of pushing me away, I would have left you inside. I followed his gaze without meaning to, back toward the ballroom, toward the doors that had already closed, and suddenly the silence inside did not feel like luxury anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something watching, something waiting. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening as the realization settled in. Whatever I had walked into tonight had not ended when the glass shattered. It had only started, and walking back would not undo it, would not erase it, would only make me easier to find. What happens if I say no? I asked, my voice quieter now, more honest, more afraid. He did not answer right away, and that silence said more than anything else could have. He opened the car door himself, the movement smooth, unhurried, like time worked differently around him, and then he looked at me again, really looked this time, not as a stranger, not as a mistake, but as something already pulled into his world, whether I wanted it or not. Then you walk away, he said finally, calm, absolute. And we both pretend this never happened. Hope flickered, small and desperate, but it did not last, because he took one step closer, just enough for me to hear the truth underneath the words. And they will find you before sunrise. The city stretched out behind him, miles of lights, endless streets, places I had known my whole life. And suddenly none of them felt safe anymore. Not my apartment, not my job, not even the sidewalk I had walked 100 times without thinking. Everything had changed in a single moment, in a single sound of breaking glass. And now I was standing at the edge of something I could not see, but could feel pulling me in. I looked at the open car door, then back at him, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. And without fully understanding why, without fully accepting what it meant, I took a step forward. I did not remember sitting down, only the sound of the door closing behind me, soft, final, like something sealing in place, and suddenly the world outside felt farther than it should have. The city lights blurring behind tinted glass as the car pulled away from the curb without hesitation, without asking if I was ready. I sat rigid in the leather seat, my hands folded too tightly in my lap, the faint sting in my wrist reminding me this was real, that none of this was something I could wake up from. He sat across from me, not beside me, giving me space that did not feel like freedom, more like distance measured with intention, his posture relaxed, composed, as if this was just another night, just another decision, while my entire life had tilted in less than 5 minutes. Where are we going? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, because I refused to sound as lost as I was. His gaze lifted from where it had been resting, not on his phone, not on anything obvious, just thinking, calculating, always aware, somewhere safe, he replied. Simple, controlled, like safety was something he could define and I could not. I let out a small breath that was almost a laugh, almost disbelief. You keep saying that like I am in danger, I said, turning slightly to face him more directly. But you still have not told me why. The car moved smoothly through the city, turning corners I recognized, streets I had walked 100 times, yet everything looked different now, sharper, more distant, like I was already outside of it, watching instead of living in it. He studied me again, that same unreadable look, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle, or how much I deserved. Do you remember the terrace? He asked, and my stomach tightened instantly, because I did remember, not clearly, not fully, but enough. Two men speaking in low voices, numbers, dates, something about a shipment. I had not meant to listen, had not even realized I was until it was too late. I did not understand what they were talking about, I said quickly, the words rushing out before he could respond. I was just passing by. I was not involved. He nodded slightly, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging. That is the problem, he said, his tone unchanged. You were not supposed to understand, but you were not supposed to be there either. My chest tightened, the pieces starting to shift into place in a way I did not like. So this is a misunderstanding, I said, clinging to the idea because it was the only version that made sense. You can just explain that to them. Tell them I did not hear anything, that I am not important. The last word slipped out before I could stop it, and something flickered in his eyes at that, something sharper, almost disapproving. You are important now, he said quietly, and the certainty in his voice made my breath catch. I shook my head, my pulse quickening again. No, I am not. I am just a waitress. I carry trays. I clean up messes. I go home and do it again the next day. That is my life. He leaned forward slightly, not invading, but close enough that I could not ignore him, could not look away. That was your life, he corrected, and there was no cruelty in it, just truth, heavy and unavoidable. The car slowed briefly at a light, the glow of red reflecting across his face, outlining features that somehow looked even more controlled, more dangerous in the stillness. The men you heard, he continued, they do not leave loose ends, not because they are cruel, but because they are careful. Careful. The words settled differently than I expected, colder, more calculated, like this was not personal, not emotional, just necessary. And you think I am a loose end? I said softly, the realization landing piece by piece. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then shook his head once. No, he said, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. I think they will see you as one. Silence filled the car again, thicker this time, harder to breathe through. I looked down at my hands, at the faint trace of red still marking my skin, and for the first time, I understood that this was not about being chosen, not really. This was about being seen, at the wrong moment, by the wrong people, and there was no way to undo that, no way to step back into the version of the night where I was invisible. So what happens now? I asked, my voice quieter, more honest, because there was no point pretending anymore. He leaned back slightly, the movement small but deliberate, like he had reached the part of the conversation he had been waiting for. Now, he said, his eyes steady on mine. You stay where I can see you. My heart skipped, not from fear this time, but from something more complicated, something I did not want to name. And if I do not want to? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Even though part of me had known since the moment I stepped into the car. He did not respond immediately, and that silence felt different now, not threatening, not empty, but certain, like gravity, like something that did not need to explain itself to exist. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost quiet enough to miss. Then you will learn very quickly, he said, that wanting has nothing to do with what comes next. The city disappeared faster than I expected. Not because we were moving quickly, but because everything I thought I knew about it no longer belonged to me. The streets grew quieter, wider, the buildings taller, cleaner, like a different version of the same place, one I had never been invited into. And I realized something that made my chest tighten. This was his world, not mine. The car turned through a set of iron gates that opened without hesitation, as if they had been waiting for him. And, for the first time since I stepped inside, I felt something close to panic rise in my throat, sharp and undeniable. You said somewhere safe. I murmured, my fingers pressing lightly into the seat beneath me, grounding myself. This does not feel like safe. He did not look offended. Did not even look surprised. Just calm. Always calm. That is because you are defining safety by what you know. He replied, his voice even, controlled. And what you know can no longer protect you. The gates closed behind us with a quiet finality that echoed louder in my head than it should have. And suddenly the distance between where I had been and where I was felt impossible to cross back. The car slowed as it approached a large house. Not just large, but precise. Every line intentional. Every light placed exactly where it needed to be. Nothing careless. Nothing accidental. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a decision. I swallowed hard as the car came to a stop, my reflection faint in the window, someone I barely recognized staring back at me. I am not staying here, I said quickly, the words slipping out before I could stop them, before I could soften them, because if I did not say it now, I might not say it at all. He stepped out of the car first, not rushing me, not reaching for me, just waiting on the other side, like he knew I would follow, like he understood something about me I did not yet understand myself. The door opened, cool air brushing against my skin, and for a moment I stayed still, suspended between leaving and staying, between the life I had and the one unfolding without my permission. Emily, he said, and my name sounded different here, quieter, heavier, like it meant something more than it had an hour ago. I looked up at him, forcing myself to hold his gaze. You keep deciding things for me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You keep telling me what I have to do, where I have to go, like I do not get a choice. Something shifted then, subtle but real, not anger, not irritation, something closer to interest. Like I had said something unexpected, something worth noticing. He stepped closer, not enough to trap me, just enough that I could feel the space between us change. You do have a choice, he said quietly, and for the first time, there was something almost gentle in his tone, something that did not match the rest of him. You just do not have all the options you think you do. I exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling deeper than I wanted them to, because part of me knew he was right. Part of me had known since the moment I walked out of that ballroom, but knowing it and accepting it were not the same thing. And what happens if I walk away right now? I asked, testing the edges of something I was not sure I wanted to find. He did not answer immediately, and that pause stretched, filled with something I could not name, something that made my heartbeat louder, slower, heavier, until finally he spoke, not louder, not harsher, just clearer. Then I let you, he said, and that should have felt like relief. It should have felt like freedom, but it did not, because he held my gaze a second longer, just long enough for the truth to settle in behind the words. And I will not be able to help you when they come looking. The night stretched out around us, quiet, still, waiting, and I realized then that this was not about being forced, not really. This was about understanding the cost of every step I took from here. I looked past him, at the open space beyond the gates, at the city lights I had always trusted to guide me home. And for the first time, they did not feel like home at all. They felt distant, unreachable, like something I had already lost. My chest tightened as I looked back at him, at the calm certainty in his eyes, at the way he stood there like he was not asking, not demanding, just offering something I could not fully understand yet. And slowly, almost without realizing it, I stepped out of the car. The ground felt different beneath my feet, too smooth, too quiet, like even the sound of my steps did not belong here. And I hated how aware I was of everything. The way the air smelled cleaner, the way the lights did not flicker, the way nothing seemed out of place. It made me feel like I was the only thing that did not fit. I wrapped my arms slightly around myself without thinking, a small, automatic attempt to hold on to something familiar, something mine, but even that felt weaker here, like the space itself was stripping away everything I used to rely on. He walked beside me, not touching, not guiding, just there, and somehow that was worse, because it meant I had walked in on my own. This is not necessary, I said, the words coming out quieter now, less defiant, more tired. You could have just explained everything. I would have stayed out of it. He did not slow down, did not look at me right away, just opened the front door as if the conversation was already happening on a level I had not caught up to yet. You are still trying to make this smaller than it is, he said, stepping inside, and I hesitated at the threshold, something in me resisting, something still hoping that if I did not cross this line, I could pretend none of this was real. But the moment stretched too long, and I knew, deep down, that turning around would not undo anything. It would only leave me unprotected, unseen. And for the first time that felt worse than staying. So I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a quiet final click that echoed louder in my chest than in the room. The interior was exactly what I expected and nothing like it at the same time. Large, precise, everything in its place. But there was no warmth, no clutter, no sign of someone living here in the way I understood living. It felt controlled, intentional, like every object had been chosen for a reason I could not see. Do people actually live here? I asked before I could stop myself, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me then, and for a brief second, something almost like amusement touched his expression. I do, he answered simply, and I shook my head, letting out a small breath. That is not what I meant, I murmured, because this did not feel like a home. It felt like a place where decisions were made, where outcomes were decided before anyone else knew they were part of it. He motioned slightly toward a hallway. You should take care of your hand, he said, his tone shifting just enough to catch me off guard. And I looked down, almost forgetting the thin line of red still marking my wrist. It is nothing, I replied quickly, instinctively, because I had spent years convincing myself that small things did not matter, that discomfort was normal, that I could handle more than I needed to. But he did not accept that, did not argue either, just reached for a clean cloth from a nearby surface and held it out to me. Waiting, not forcing, not insisting, just expecting, and something about that made my chest tighten in a way I did not understand. I hesitated, then took it, pressing it lightly against my skin, the simple action grounding me more than anything else had since the night began. Thank you, I said quietly, the words unfamiliar in this space. He nodded once, like gratitude was not something he needed but understood anyway. Silence settled between us again, but it felt different now, less sharp, more watchful, like something was shifting, slowly, carefully. You still have not told me your name, I said after a moment, realizing how strange it was that I had followed a man into a place like this without even knowing who he was. He looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring whether I was ready for that answer, or what it would mean once I had it. Sebastian, he said finally, his voice low, steady. Sebastian Wolf. The name settled in the air between us, heavier than it should have been, like it carried something beyond just letters and sound. And before I could stop myself, before I could filter the thought, I repeated it softly, testing it, Sebastian. And something in his expression shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like hearing his name from me meant more than it should have. Like this moment, this small, simple exchange, had changed something neither of us had expected. And for the first time since the glass shattered, I realized this was not just about danger anymore. It was about something else, something I could not define yet, but could already feel pulling me deeper in. His name lingered longer than it should have, like it had weight, like saying it out loud had pulled me one step further into something I still did not understand. And I hated how aware I was of that. How quickly everything was shifting without my permission. I pressed the cloth gently against my wrist again, more for something to do than because it still hurt. And for a moment neither of us spoke, the silence stretching but not empty, not uncomfortable, just present, like it was waiting to see who would break first. So what now, Sebastian? I asked finally, the question steadier than I felt, because if I did not start asking, I would lose whatever ground I had left. His gaze did not leave mine, not even for a second, and that alone made it hard to breathe. Now you stay here, he said, simple, direct, like it was already decided, like there was no version of this where I walked out the same way I walked in. I let out a small breath, shaking my head slightly. You keep saying that like it is temporary, I replied, my voice quieter now, more careful, but nothing about this feels temporary. Something in his expression shifted, subtle but real, like he was considering how much truth to give me. It is temporary, he said after a moment, until it is not. The answer did not help. Not really, but it felt honest in a way I could not ignore. I glanced around the room again, taking in the clean lines, the controlled space, the absence of anything unnecessary, and suddenly I felt very small inside it, like I had been placed in someone else's life without being asked. Do you do this often? I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out with more edge than I intended. His brow lifted slightly, not offended, just curious. Bring strangers into your house, I clarified, meeting his gaze again because I refused to look away first. He studied me for a second longer, then shook his head once. No, he said, and something in the way he answered made it clear he was not lying, that this, whatever this was not routine, was not normal, even for him. Then why me? I pressed, the question heavier now, more real, because I needed to understand what had changed, what had made me worth this level of attention, of risk. He did not answer immediately, and that pause stretched just long enough to make my pulse quicken. Because you did not look away, he said finally, and the words caught me off guard. From what? I asked, confused, searching his face for something that made sense. From me. He replied, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. Most people do. I blinked, the answer settling in slowly. Not what I expected, not what I was prepared for, and for a moment I did not know what to say, because he was right. I had looked at him, even when something in me had warned me not to, even when instinct had told me to disappear. I had still looked, and somehow that had changed everything. That is not a reason, I said softly, more to myself than to him. But he heard it anyway, of course he did. It is enough, he answered, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this was not just about logic, not just about danger. There was something else here, something he was not saying, something I could feel but not name. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers lightly along the edge of the cloth, grounding myself again. I have a life, I said after a moment, the words coming out steadier now, more certain. I have a job, bills, responsibilities, people who expect me to show up tomorrow. He nodded. Once, like he understood, like he respected it. But it did not change anything. And if you go back to that life tomorrow, he said calmly, you will not be the same person walking into it. I held his gaze, my chest tightening again, because I knew he was right. I had known since the moment the glass shattered, since the moment he pointed at me, that something had shifted in a way I could not undo. Then what am I supposed to be now? I asked quietly, and for the first time, there was no defiance in my voice, no resistance, just honesty, raw and unfiltered. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was seeing something I could not see yet, like he was waiting for me to understand it on my own. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, steady but not distant. Alive, he said simply, and the word landed heavier than anything else he had said, because for the first time, I realized that might be the only thing I could choose anymore. The word stayed with me longer than anything else he had said. Alive, simple, undeniable, and somehow heavier than every question still spinning in my head. I let out a slow breath, my fingers loosening slightly around the cloth as I tried to understand what that meant, what it would cost, because nothing about this felt free, nothing about this felt like a choice I could make without losing something in return. You say that like it is enough, I said quietly, lifting my eyes back to his, searching for something I could hold on to, some kind of certainty. But he only watched me, steady, patient in a way that made me feel like I was the one running out of time. It is, he replied, not louder, not sharper, just firm, like he believed it completely. And maybe he did. Maybe in his world that was enough, survival over everything else. But in mine, in the life I had built piece by piece, it was never that simple. I shook my head slightly, taking a small step back, needing space even. If it did not change anything, you do not understand, I said, my voice tightening despite myself. I cannot just stop being who I was this morning. I cannot just disappear and pretend that is fine. Something flickered in his expression then, not disagreement, not dismissal, something closer to recognition, like he understood more than he was saying. I am not asking you to pretend, he said, his tone softer now, almost measured. I am asking you to adapt. The word landed differently than I expected, less forceful, more inevitable, like something that happened whether you agreed to it or not. I let out a small breath, glancing down for a second before looking back at him. And, if I cannot, I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, honest in a way I had not planned. His gaze held mine, unshaken, and for a moment he did not answer, the silence stretching just enough to make my chest tighten again. You can. he said finally, and there was no doubt in his voice, no hesitation, like he had already decided that for me. Like failure was not an option he recognized. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so far from the way I saw myself. You do not know me, I said, quieter now, not defensive, just real. You saw me for 5 minutes in a room I do not belong in, and now you think you know what I can handle. He took a step closer, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to make me stop moving, to make me listen. I know enough, he said, his voice low, steady. You stayed when you should have left. You spoke when you could have stayed silent. And you are still standing here asking questions instead of running. My breath caught slightly, because he was right, every word of it. And I hated how clearly he saw it, how easily he had read something in me I had spent years trying to ignore. That is not strength, I murmured, looking away for a second. That is bad timing. He shook his head once, a small movement but certain. That is choice, he corrected, and something in my chest tightened again, because no one had ever framed it that way before. No one had ever made it sound like I had any control in the moments I thought I was just reacting, just surviving. I swallowed slowly, the weight of everything settling deeper, heavier. And what if I do not want to be this person you think I am? I asked, my voice softer now, more uncertain, because I was not sure I recognized that version of myself either. He watched me for a long moment, like he was considering the question, like it mattered more than I expected, and when he answered, his voice was quieter than before, but no less certain. Then you learn how to become someone who survives what is coming. The words hung between us, not threatening, not forceful, just honest in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I felt my chest rise and fall slowly, my thoughts quieter now, not because I had answers, but because I was starting to understand the shape of the situation I was in, the edges of it, the reality of it. And for the first time since this night began, I realized something that shifted everything just a little. This was not just about him pulling me into his world. It was about me deciding whether I would break inside it or change enough to stay standing. And that choice, terrifying as it was, might be the only thing that still belonged to me. The silence after his words did not feel empty anymore. It felt like something settling into place, something I could not push away no matter how much I wanted to. I stood there, still, aware of the space around me in a way I had never been before, every detail sharper, every sound quieter, like the world had narrowed down to just this moment, just this choice, and I hated how real it felt, how final. I drew in a slow breath, my fingers relaxing at my sides as I forced myself to meet his gaze. Again, not as someone being pulled, but as someone still standing, still deciding. You make it sound simple, I said, my voice steady but softer now, less resistance, more thought. Like I can just change overnight and survive something I do not even understand. He did not interrupt, did not correct me, just listened, and somehow that made it harder, because it meant he was waiting for me to reach the conclusion on my own. I have spent my whole life trying to stay out of trouble, I continued, the words coming more easily now, more honest, keeping my head down, doing what I am supposed to do, and somehow that still brought me here. I let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. So forgive me if I do not trust your version of how this works. He watched me carefully, not offended, not dismissive, just focused, like every word mattered, like I mattered more than I should have. You are not here because you failed, he said finally, his tone calm but certain. You are here because you noticed something most people would have ignored. I frowned slightly, confusion pulling at the edges of my thoughts. That is not something to reward, I replied, shaking my head. That is something to avoid. He took a small step closer, not closing the distance completely, just enough to shift the air between us again. In your world, maybe, he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate. In mine, it means you pay attention, and people who pay attention are either valuable or dangerous. The words settled heavily, and for a moment I did not know which one I was supposed to be, which one he thought I was, and which one am I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He did not answer right away, his gaze steady, unreadable, and that pause stretched long enough to make my chest tighten again. That depends on what you do next, he said at last, and something about that answer made everything feel more real, more immediate, because it meant nothing was decided yet. Not completely. I swallowed slowly, glancing down for a second before lifting my eyes back to his. So I am being tested, I said, not accusing, just understanding. He shook his head once, subtle but firm. You are being given time. He corrected, and the difference between those two things hit harder than I expected, because time meant opportunity, but it also meant pressure, expectation, consequence. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts shifting, adjusting, trying to catch up to a reality that kept moving faster than I could process. And what happens when that time runs out? I asked, my voice quieter now, more careful, because I was starting to understand that every answer mattered, that every word shaped something I could not see yet. He held my gaze, and for a moment there was something in his expression I had not seen before, not control, not distance, something closer to honesty, unguarded and brief. Then you will already know where you stand, he said, and the certainty in his voice made my chest tighten again, not from fear this time, but from something deeper, something that felt like the edge of a decision I was not ready to make. I looked around the room once more, at the space that still did not feel like mine, at the quiet that no longer felt empty, and slowly, I realized something I had been resisting since the beginning. This was not a moment I could wait out, not a situation that would resolve itself if I stayed still long enough. This was something I had to step into, whether I was ready or not, and for the first time, I did not step back. Something inside me shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but enough that I could feel it, like the ground beneath my feet had settled into a different shape, one I could either fight or learn to stand on. And for the first time since this night began, I stopped trying to step back from it. I lifted my chin slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation, without that flicker of uncertainty that had been there before. Then I guess I should stop waiting, I said quietly, and the words felt strange in my mouth. But right, more right than anything else I had said so far. His expression did not change much, but I saw it, that subtle shift, that acknowledgement that something had clicked, that I was no longer just reacting, I was choosing. Good, he replied, simple, but there was something in the way he said it that made it feel like more than approval, like recognition. I took a slow breath, letting my shoulders relax just slightly, not because I felt safe, but because I understood. Now that tension alone would not help me. So tell me what I am supposed to do. I continued, my voice steady, controlled. Because standing here guessing is not going to keep me alive. The word felt different now, less abstract, more immediate. He watched me for a moment longer, then nodded once, like he had been waiting for me to ask that question. First, he said, his tone shifting, more focused now, more direct. You stop thinking of yourself as someone passing through this. I frowned. Slightly, processing. That, you are here, he continued, which means you are part of it, whether you like it or not. I let that settle, the weight of it pressing against everything I thought I understood about control, about choice. But I did not argue, not this time. And second, he added, stepping slightly to the side, giving me a clearer view down the hallway. You start paying attention. I followed his gesture, my eyes moving along the clean lines, the quiet space, the details I had been too overwhelmed to notice before, cameras, subtle but present, angles that covered more than I realized, doors placed with intention, nothing random, nothing careless. To what? I asked, even though I was starting to see it, starting to understand what he meant. To everything. He answered simply, and something in his voice made it clear that was not advice, it was expectation. I nodded slowly, my mind already shifting, adjusting. The way it did when I had to learn something quickly just to keep up, just to stay afloat. And if I miss something, I said, glancing back at him, because that felt like the more important question, the one that actually mattered. He held my gaze, steady as always, but there was something sharper there now, something that matched the seriousness of the moment. Then you learn faster next time, he said, and the lack of reassurance should have scared me more than it did, but instead it felt clear. Honest in a way I could work with. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts aligning. In a way they had not before, less scattered, more focused, like I was finally seeing the shape of the situation instead of just reacting to it. You really think I can do this? I asked, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to understand how he saw me, why he was so certain when I had spent most of my life being overlooked, underestimated, He did not hesitate this time, did not pause or consider. "I know you can," he said, and the certainty in his voice hit harder than I expected, because it was not encouragement. It was belief, solid and unshaken, like it had been there from the start. I looked at him for a second longer, something in my chest tightening again, but not from fear, not this time. Something else, something unfamiliar. Then I nodded once, small but real. "Then I guess I do not have a choice," I said quietly, and he tilted his head slightly, that same almost unreadable expression returning. "You always have a choice," he replied, calm as ever. "You are just starting to understand the consequences of it." The words settled differently now, not like a warning, not like a threat, but like a truth I could not ignore. I glanced around the room again, taking in everything with new eyes, sharper, more aware, and for the first time, I did not feel completely out of place, not because I belonged here, but because I was beginning to understand how to exist here, and that, more than anything, changed everything. The shift was subtle, but it changed everything. The way I stood, the way I looked at the room, even the way I breathed felt different, slower, more deliberate, like I was no longer trying to escape the moment, but actually exist inside it. And that realization alone was enough to make my chest tighten, not with fear, but with something sharper, something closer to awareness. I moved a few steps further into the space, my eyes tracing the lines I had ignored before, the corners, the shadows, the quiet places where details hid in plain sight. And for the first time, I saw it the way he wanted me to see it, not as a house, but as a system, designed, controlled, intentional. "You built this," I said, not really a question, more like a realization forming out loud. He did not answer immediately, but I felt his attention shift, the weight of it settling on me without pressure. "I made sure it works," he replied after a moment, and that answer told me more than a yes ever could. I nodded, slowly, absorbing that, adjusting to it. "Everything here has a purpose," I murmured, almost to myself, and I saw it then, the faintest trace of approval in his expression, like I had just passed something without knowing it was a test. "Nothing is left to chance," he confirmed, and something about that settled into me, not as comfort, but as clarity. I turned slightly, my gaze landing on a narrow hallway I had not noticed before, darker than the rest, quieter, and without thinking, I stepped toward it, not far, just enough to see where it led. "And that includes me," I added, glancing back at him, because that was the part that mattered. He did not deny it, did not soften it. "Yes," he said simply, and the honesty in that answer made it easier to accept. Even if I did not like it, I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of a nearby table, grounding myself again, but this time it felt different, not like I was holding on, but like I was testing where I stood. "Then I need to understand the rules," I said, turning fully toward him now, my voice steady, clear, because this was no longer about reacting. It was about learning, adapting, surviving. He watched me for a second longer, then inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the shift. "You do not speak about what you hear here," he began, his tone calm but precise. "You do not ask questions outside of this space, and you do not leave without telling me." Each word landed carefully, not rushed, not forced, just stated as fact. I nodded once, taking it in, committing it to memory, because I understood now that missing something small could mean everything. "And if I break one of those rules?" I asked, not because I wanted to test it, but because I needed to know the boundaries. He held my gaze, steady as ever. "Then you make things harder for yourself," he said, and the lack of drama in his tone made it more serious, not less. I absorbed that, letting it settle into the framework forming in my mind. "That is it," I said, after a moment, a hint of disbelief slipping through despite everything. "That is all I have to do." He tilted his head slightly, that same almost unreadable look returning. "For now," he replied, and something in the way he said it told me there would be more, much more. I let out a slow breath, glancing around the room one more time. But this time I was not overwhelmed, not lost, just aware, present, and strangely, that felt like progress. "And what about you?" I asked, the question coming before I could stop it, because if I was learning the rules, I needed to understand the person setting them. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, and that was the first time I had seen him hesitate, even slightly. "What about me?" he repeated, and I met his gaze, holding it, refusing to look away. "What are your rules?" I said quietly, and the silence that followed was different, not empty, not tense, but charged, like something important had just shifted, like I had stepped into a space that not many people reached, and for the first time, I realized that understanding this world was not just about surviving it. It was about understanding him, and that might be the most dangerous part of all. The question lingered between us, heavier than anything else I had said so far, not because it was complicated, but because it crossed something invisible, something I had not fully understood until now. And for the first time since I met him, Sebastian did not answer right away, not even with that calm certainty he carried so easily. He just looked at me, steady, unreadable, but there was something different there now, something sharper, more focused, like I had stepped into territory that was not meant to be explored so quickly. I held his gaze anyway, refusing to look away, because if I was going to survive this, I needed to understand the person at the center of it, not just the rules he set. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but deliberate, like he was deciding whether I had earned the answer or whether I needed to wait. "My rules are simple," he said finally, his voice lower than before, more controlled, like each word was chosen with care. "I do not repeat myself." I nodded slightly, absorbing that. It made sense. Everything about him suggested precision, finality, no wasted effort. "I do not make threats," he continued, and something in that line made my chest tighten, because I realized then that everything he had said to me so far had not been a threat. It had been information, truth, and somehow that made it more serious, not less. "And I do not protect people who do not listen." The last part settled deeper than the others, not because it was harsh, but because it was clear, conditional, something I could not ignore. I exhaled slowly, letting that sink in, my mind already adjusting, already aligning itself with the structure he had just outlined. "So this is protection," I said quietly, not questioning, just confirming, because I needed to hear it out loud, needed to understand what I had stepped into. His gaze softened, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just certainty. I studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile that word with everything I had felt since the night began. The fear, the confusion, the shift in my entire world. "It does not feel like protection," I admitted, my voice honest, unfiltered, because there was no point pretending anymore. He did not seem surprised by that, did not take offense, just nodded once. "That is because you are still measuring it against what you knew before," he replied, calm as ever. "Protection is not always comfortable, Emily." The way he said my name again, steady, deliberate, made something in my chest tighten, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, like I was being seen in a way I had not experienced before. I looked down for a second, then back at him, grounding myself again. "And what do you get out of this?" I asked, the question forming slowly but landing with more weight than I expected, because this was the part that did not make sense. Nothing about this felt one-sided. Nothing about him suggested he did anything without reason. He paused again, just briefly, but I noticed it. I noticed everything now. "Clarity," he said finally, and the answer caught me off guard. "About what?" I pressed, because that was not enough. "Not yet." His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering. "About you," he replied, and something in the way he said it made my breath catch. Not from fear, not entirely, but from something deeper, something I could not name yet. I frowned slightly, trying to understand. "You already said I am either valuable or dangerous," I said, recalling his earlier words. "So which is it?" He stepped a little closer, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to make the space between us feel more intentional, more focused. "That is what I am deciding," he said quietly, and the honesty in that answer settled into me in a way I could not ignore, because it meant this was not finished, not defined. I was still something in motion, something being observed, measured, understood. I swallowed slowly, my pulse steady but present. "And if I am dangerous?" I asked, my voice softer now, more careful, because I was starting to understand the weight of these questions. He did not look away, did not hesitate. "Then I make sure you are not," he said, and the way he said it, calm, absolute, sent a quiet chill through me. not from fear, but from the realization that whatever this was, whatever role I had stepped into, it was no longer something I could walk away from. And for the first time, I understood that the most dangerous part of this was not the world outside. It was the fact that I was beginning to trust the one person who controlled it. His words did not fade after he said them. They stayed, echoing quietly in my head, reshaping everything I thought I understood about this situation, about him, about myself, and I hated how easily they settled in, how naturally they began to make sense. I drew in a slow breath, my fingers loosening at my sides as I forced myself to stay present, to not retreat into the version of me that avoided things I could not control, because that version would not survive here. I could feel it now, clear and undeniable. You make decisions about people like it is nothing, I said quietly, lifting my eyes to meet his again, not accusing, not angry, just trying to understand the weight of it, valuable or dangerous, worth protecting or not. Like it is that simple. He did not react the way I expected, did not defend it, did not dismiss it, just watched me, steady, considering. It is not simple, he replied after a moment, his voice calm but grounded in something deeper. It is necessary. The word landed differently than I expected, not cold, not careless, just certain, like it had been proven over time, like it was not a belief but a reality he lived in. I swallowed slowly, letting that settle, because part of me understood that, even if I did not want to. And what happens when you are wrong? I asked, the question forming before I could stop it, because if he was the one deciding, the one controlling, then that mattered. That had to matter. Something shifted in his expression. Then, subtle, but real, not irritation, not defensiveness, something closer to awareness, like I had touched on something that was not often questioned. Then I correct it, he said, and there was no hesitation in his answer, no uncertainty, just quiet certainty. I frowned slightly, the simplicity of that response almost unsettling. That is it, I murmured, more to myself than to him. You just correct it. He took a step closer, not overwhelming, just enough to bring his presence back into focus. Emily, he said, and my name sounded different again, steadier, more deliberate. In my world, hesitation costs more than being wrong. I held his gaze, the weight of that statement, settling deeper than anything else he had said, because I could feel the truth in it, even if I did not fully understand the scale. And in yours, he continued, his voice softer now, less distant. Being wrong is something you can recover from. I let out a small breath, the contrast hitting me harder than I expected, because he was right. My mistakes had consequences, but they were small, manageable, fixable. This was not that kind of world. This was something else entirely. I looked away for a second, gathering my thoughts, then back at him, more grounded now, more certain. So where does that leave me? I asked, my voice steady, because I needed to know, needed to understand what space I occupied in this. He studied me for a moment, longer than before, like the answer mattered, like I mattered more than he was used to admitting. It leaves you learning, he said finally, and something in that answer shifted everything again, because it was not final, not limiting, it was open, uncertain, and somehow that felt more dangerous than anything else. I nodded slowly, absorbing it, adjusting to it. And if I learned fast enough, I pressed, because I was starting to understand how this worked, how everything connected. His gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. Then you stop being a question, he replied, and the words landed with quiet weight, because that was what I was right now, not a person in his world, not yet, just a variable, something being observed, something not fully defined. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising and falling in a rhythm that finally felt controlled again. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was being pulled through this. I felt like I was moving with it, step by step, choice by choice. Even if the path was not entirely mine. I glanced around the room once more, the space that had felt foreign now just unfamiliar, something I could navigate, something I could learn. And when I looked back at him, there was something different in my expression, something steadier, more certain, because I understood now that this was not about proving myself to him, not entirely. It was about proving to myself that I could exist in a world that had never been meant for me. And that realization, as quiet as it was, changed everything. The room felt quieter now, Not because the world had slowed down, but because I had. My thoughts no longer racing to escape, no longer searching for a way back to something that no longer existed. I stood there, steady, aware of the space, aware of him, aware of myself in a way I had never been before. And for the first time since this night began, I did not feel like I was standing on the edge of something unknown. I felt like I had already stepped into it. I took a slow breath, lifting my chin slightly as I met his gaze again, not as someone being watched, but as someone who understood she was part of the equation now. So I am not a question forever, I said quietly, more statement than doubt, because I could feel the shift, could feel something settling into place. He studied me for a moment, longer than usual, like he was seeing the difference too, like he was measuring something that had changed without either of us naming it directly. No, he said finally, his voice calm. Certain, no one stays a question forever. The words lingered, not heavy this time, but clear, like a path I could follow if I chose to. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, because that was the first thing that had felt like an answer since all of this started. And when I am not, I continued, my voice steady, grounded in something new, something stronger. What happens then? He did not look away, did not hesitate. But there was something different in his expression now, something less distant, less calculated, like the line between observation and involvement had blurred just slightly. Then you decide where you stand, he replied, and the weight of that answer settled deeper than anything else, because it placed the final step back in my hands. Not completely, not freely, but enough to matter. I let out a slow breath, my fingers relaxing fully now. The tension that had followed me since the moment the glass shattered finally loosening its grip, not disappearing, but changing, becoming something I could carry instead of something that controlled me. I glanced around the room again. The space that had once felt foreign, now simply unfamiliar, something I could learn, something I could navigate. And when I looked back at him, there was no hesitation left. In my gaze, no flicker of doubt, just quiet understanding. Then I guess I should start deciding, I said softly, and the words felt real, solid, like they belonged to me. He nodded once, a small movement, but meaningful, like he recognized that shift, like he had been waiting for it. You already have, he said, and something in his tone made my chest tighten again, not from fear, but from the realization that every step I had taken tonight had already been a choice, even the ones I thought had been made for me. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then let out a quiet breath, the air steady, controlled. You know, I said after a second, something almost like a faint smile touching my voice despite everything. This is not how I thought tonight would go. He tilted his head slightly, that same almost unreadable expression returning, but softer now. No, he replied. It rarely is. And for a moment, the tension between us shifted, just slightly, not gone, not resolved, but different, less like a standoff, more like the beginning of something neither of us had fully planned. I turned slightly, taking a few slow steps further into the space, not because I was told to, not because I had to, but because I chose to, and that difference mattered more than anything else. I stopped near the window, the city lights stretching out beyond the glass, distant but still there, a reminder of the life I had stepped away from. And I realized then that it was not gone, not completely. It was just different now, like everything else. I glanced back over my shoulder, meeting his eyes one more time, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was looking at a stranger. I felt like I was looking at the beginning of something I did not understand yet, something that would change me whether I was ready or not. And as the silence settled between us again, no longer heavy, no longer uncertain, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was not the night my life ended. It was the night it became something else entirely.